Hello, and welcome everybody to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online. I'm Will Hopkins, and if you are new to New Hampshire Peace Action, we educate, mobilize, and organize to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We envisage a future where international relations are based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. Almost 3 years ago now, we started this conversation series as a way to stay in touch and continue our public education work. And we've found that it is so effective at reaching out and getting through to people that we've decided to continue it on indefinitely. This conversation series is intended to encourage the conversations that we think we need to have to encourage the changes that we've all been yearning for. And in the spirit of understanding and respect, I want to take a minute to acknowledge that we're doing our work here on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We want to honor with gratitude the land and waterways that they've been stewarding throughout the generations. Tonight, we are excited to be joined by Emma Shapiro-Weiss and Lisa Demain, who are the co-directors of 350 New Hampshire, which is, I think at this point, New Hampshire's largest climate justice organization by a wide margin. And some people know that 350 New Hampshire got its start as a special project of New Hampshire Peace Action with one quarter-time staff about 8 or 9 years ago. And has grown into a nonprofit much bigger than we are. And they've been doing amazing work around the state, in particular, the No Coal, No Gas campaign. They've been conducting nonviolent direct action trainings. They've been tracking legislation. And today they're here to talk to us about how the peace movement and the climate justice movement can work together a little bit better. So without any further ado, Lisa and Emma, take it away.
All right, here's my question. See my notes?
We see a loading screen right now.
Oh, do. Okay. So as I'm
there we go. Now we see it.
You see my notes too?
No, we just see your PowerPoint.
Great. Awesome. That's the goal. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Demain. I use she, her pronouns. I'm over in Dover, New Hampshire. I am one of the co-executive directors, and I'll let Emma introduce herself.
Hey, y'all. I'm Emma Shapiro-Weiss. I use she, her pronouns. I'm over in Peterborough, New Hampshire, and I'm the other co-ED.
So just some quick Zoom logistics. If you could rename yourself and add your pronouns so we can know how to address you if you ask a question or say something very awesome in the comments. You can also open the chat and type the asterisk, the 8, shifts to 8, to speak when we have conversations at the end, or if you have questions along the way. But overall, keep yourself on mute. So that means having the microphone with the line through it. And as you may have already figured out, we're live streaming this. This is being recorded. So if you don't want to be on video, you would want to take off your video. And you can also turn on closed captioning. So at the top, it says a participant has enabled closed captioning, and you can click through that to turn on closed captioning. Overall, during this presentation, when someone is speaking, please stay on mute so we can minimize our background noise. And please use the chat. We want to know if you appreciate what's going on, or if you agree what's going on, or if you're upset over the connections between climate and militarism. And if you have questions or comments that are relevant, you can again use the star to speak, or use the word stack, and we can put you in stack. So that means that it'll just go in turn of who talk. And then we also want to embody the principle of move up, move back, which means move up, move back, which means to equitably share your airtime. So if you've asked a couple of questions, take a break, let somebody else ask a couple of questions, and overall take care of yourself. You know, we're in the 7 o'clock hour. Some people like to eat dinner during this, and that's totally fine. Or if you need to take a break, you can go ahead and take a break. You can watch the rest of it later, or you can come back to it and just catch up. And we also have a land acknowledgement. I don't know if everyone wants to do it.
You get 2 land acknowledgements today. And yeah, both courtesy of Indigenous New Hampshire. So I really want to invite everyone to acknowledge the land that you're on as we begin. And if you're not in New Hampshire and you want to put the land that you're on in the chats, feel free to do so. Here in New Hampshire, we're on Indakana, which is the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the Alnumbak who have stewarded Indakana throughout the generations. And Indigenous New Hampshire is a grassroots movement of community members with diverse cultural backgrounds working to reframe New Hampshire's heritage through a decolonial lens. And there's their website if you want to check out more about them. And when we talk about the land is a part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, our future. We carry our ancestors with us, all around us. All of us do. And today, Indigenous peoples continue to protect and remain in relationship with these ancestors and will continue to do so. And it's vital to honor these beginnings and recognize the ongoing dedication, the importance of the Indigenous culture with our communities and within the land that we're on. So yeah, it's important to understand the longstanding history that has brought you to reside on this land and to seek to understand your place within that history. Going forward, a little about what we're talking about today. So we just want to do a little scene setting about what climate justice is about, how we approach our work, and touching a little bit on environmental racism, frontline communities, setting the scene for the language that we use and the ways we approach environmental justice, of course, doing the connections between climate and militarism. And then we'll have some space at the end for us to just have some discussion, reflection, question time.
So first, to start, the basis of what is climate justice. So this is a term that we use to frame these ethical pieces of, as an ethical and political issue. So it's not just about the effects of climate change and the causes of climate change. It is about who is being affected, who is causing climate change, and specifically in environmental justice and social justice, what is going on. So we want to make sure that it's a dynamic issue and get that across to you all, and that there's the historical responsibilities for climate change is one of the bigger pieces here of what does it mean to take in climate change as a result of climate change causes, and asking the question of who are the people that need to be involved in getting to the solutions and mitigation that we need desperately. So another term to talk about is environmental justice. And this video is much better at it than I would be, so we're just going to watch this for a little bit. Please let me know in the chat if you can't hear it.
Can't hear it, Lisa. Yeah, sometimes when you screen share, there's a button at the bottom that says also share sound, which might be the issue.
Usually if it doesn't work, you gotta unshare and then reshare with the and double check the button. Doesn't hurt to do the optimize video button too.
Share screen options. And sharing options. That's share sound is a button. We got it. We're going.
Here are all the people living in it, people of all different colors, ages, wealths, and incomes. Except they don't all live together in the same place. They're separated into different parts of the city by what color they are, what language they speak, and how much money they have. And those different parts of the city look quite different. The parts that are whiter and wealthier tend to have green spaces, grocery stores with nutritious organic food, and of course the money to buy it, and are often far away from pollution-emitting freeways. The parts that are poorer and more diverse tend to have industrial sites, heavy-duty diesel-polluted ports and highways, and hazardous waste, all things that the city relies on to run properly, but that heavily pollute the air and water. And even if they had those grocery stores with nutritious organic food, most residents there couldn't afford it anyway. How did this happen? Well, this segregation can be traced back to race-based zoning and housing policies, but it wasn't always as deliberate as plain old racism. Some separations can simply be traced to poor land use planning. And as a result, these residents of the same city live very different lives. Say the city realizes it has an emissions problem. It comes up with a plan to reduce air pollution, plant more trees to suck up the carbon, or start a cap-and-trade program. But those trees get planted in the neighborhoods that are already green, and the factories that are spewing toxins into the air just buy more carbon offsets and keep spewing their toxins. The benefits of these programs are enjoyed by the communities that are already doing just fine, and the communities that were hurting most from all that air pollution, well, they're still hurting. This isn't just an imaginary city, this is the story of real cities all across the US where people might live in the very same area code, but their race, ethnicity, or wealth and income bracket causes them to experience wildly different quality of air, water, and life. In fact, it can even mean that they also experience different deaths. That's how serious this stuff is. This kind of inequity expands far beyond cities, too. Rural areas are full of commercially valuable resources like oil and coal, and they're also home to indigenous and low-income communities. But when those resources are extracted, those communities don't see any of the money, and they end up with all the air and water contamination that's left over from the extraction. And we even see this injustice on a global level, like in small island nations that are forced to directly confront the consequences of rising sea levels, but haven't played any significant role in the industries that are causing climate change. These peoples are sometimes forced to flee their homes because their land is literally going underwater. But the very states that did play a hand in creating climate change don't have migration policies to accommodate them. So when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about how we can try to break down and reimagine a system that's built up on these inequities. A system where those who are already disadvantaged because of their race and economic status are made poorer because they're unable to profit from the resources that the world depends on, and are made sick or worse by the environmental contamination that comes with extracting those resources. Social inequities are intimately tied to the environment. That's why social justice is an environmental issue too.
Awesome. So some of this video highlighted was environmental racism and how disproportionately environmental hazards impact people of color, specifically Indigenous people, Black folks, migrant folks, low-income folks, and more. And these are rules, regulations specifically made in targeted communities that don't have the backing or the time to fight back against them, but they do fight back anyhow. A perfect example of how environmental injustice intersects with racial injustice to further oppress Black, Indigenous, BIPOC communities is through environmental racism. Environmental racism refers to the institutional rules, regulation, policies, or government corporate decisions that deliberately target certain communities for locally undesirable land use, lax enforcement of zoning, environmental laws, resulting in communities being disproportionately exposed to toxic and hazardous waste based upon race. So air quality, proximity to coal plants, lead in water, military pollution, all examples of environmental racism. And racism forms the foundation for both the fossil fuel industry and the military. Neither could exist without the foundation that some human lives are worth less than others. And racial justice, climate justice, and peace all would undermine that foundation. Going a little bit into frontline communities. Frontline communities are those that feel the impacts of the climate crisis first and worse. So here are some examples of some groups that may be on the front lines of the climate crisis. And oftentimes these communities are already doing the work to stop the climate crisis, to do that mitigation in their own communities. And they're the folks closest to the problem that are best equipped to lead on the solutions and need to be involved in the solutions. So we really need to engage and work with frontline communities, recognize that environmental nonprofits alone can't stop this crisis. It's about coming together, combining resources of national orgs and NGOs with the experience and knowledge of those most impacted. We can build a diverse and powerful coalition, a movement of movements for climate and social justice.
And when we're talking about this knowledge piece around environmental racism and climate justice, at the core is intersectionality. So intersectionality is a branch of feminism that identifies how aspects of social and political discrimination overlap with gender. It was coined by renowned law scholar and critical race theorist Kimberly Crenshaw, and it was introduced in her 1989 paper called Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. And she refers to the multiple ways of different forms of discrimination like racism, sexism, classism, and how they can all combine and overlap and intersect. And so this framework must be applied to all social justice work, those that recognize multiple aspects of identity that enrich our lives and experiences, and also compound and complicate oppressions and marginalizations for individuals. If we don't acknowledge the systems of oppression that impact a certain group of people, we will never be able to understand the detrimental harm that certain communities face because of these overlapping identities. And so a question would be, what is an initial step to this work? That would be determining your personal positionality within these systems of oppression. So all of the bubbles on the right-hand side are different aspects of your position or identity, whether it's social or economic, that you hold. So for example, I am a white, cisgender, queer woman, 28 years old. I have some of a college degree, and I am of a single marital status. So those are just some of my positionalities, and I would think about those when I'm identifying issues in my community and asking who are the people that are impacted by this issue. Do I share or do I have different positionality with that person? And feel free to add other intersections that you see between climate and other fights. An example, or you could take yourself off mute and share one if you have one. An example is that Black people spend on average $41 billion on energy, yet they only hold 1.1% of energy jobs. And so once we stop seeing these fights for humanity as separate and we open ourselves up to the possibility of learning from each other in deeper ways, we will be more equipped to be able to address these issues. Not seeing anything in the chat. So
Cool. Moving right along on speaking specifically about some of these intersections. I mean, because you're here, I assume that you think that they are connected, but looking at these two issues, someone might not think that they are. They might think that they're far apart from each other, but a deeper look shows that the climate crisis cannot be solved without addressing militarism. So we're going to go a little bit into that.
First is another piece I think some people know, but maybe you don't know all the facts and numbers, is around the US military being one of the world's single largest institutional consumers of petroleum, and at the global level, a leading greenhouse gas emitter. So you'll see in the image that one military jet, the B-52 Stratocruiser, consumes as much fuel in 1 hour as the average car driver uses in 7 years. So this is where we know that it's institutions over individuals that's really going to get our solutions-based economy that we need to get to. Also, last year alone, they expected to burn 82.3 million barrels of fuel, which is more than Finland's oil consumption. And the Department of Defense's budget for this year is $816.7 billion, and that is an increase of 4.6%. And I did a little research on the Department of Defense website to see what they would do about Earth Day, because that's what, right, this is about. We just had Earth Day on Saturday. And we saw a lot of greenwashing. So there was photos of last year's Earth Day trash pickups, and they were really excited about being close to an all-electric autonomous vehicle that itself would be designed to carry exportable energy to the point of need. So they're excited to electrically move petroleum. I guess that's something that you could try to say if you're the military and say you're excited about. And then another part of my favorite part of this greenwashing is that this year's the Earth Day theme was invest in our planet, protect our future. Now is probably the time for laughing emoji reactions, in my opinion, because that is not what they're doing.
Yeah, just seeing some comments in the chat, like Doreen saying vice versa. I assume that's about the climate crisis, and militarism. Couldn't agree more. And that the DoD has failed all 5 of its audits. I believe that. But going a little bit into this graphic, this just kind of gives you a visual representation of what kind of emissions we're looking at here. And this is just emissions from fuel usage. So that would be excluding electricity, food, land use. The US military is like a middle-sized country, more than many countries. If it were a nation state, it would be the 47th largest emitter in the world. In a 2019 report released by Durham and Lancaster University found that the US military is one of the largest polluters in history, and preparing for war requires a ton of fossil fuels. There are hundreds of military bases across the world, military jets, as Lisa were saying, huge polluters, trucks, boats, now Space Force, all require so much fossil fuels. And this all costs so much money, extremely carbon heavy. And in 2017, the DoD spent $3.5 billion on heating, cooling, and providing electricity to 560,000 buildings at 500 installations. So we're just talking about like astronomical costs here.
And many people might be here knowing that a lot of the war that the US has been involved in has been around the security, quote, air quotes, of oil. Oil is the leading cause of war. 1/4 to 1/2 of all interstate wars since 1973 have been linked to oil. And I was interested to learn more about petroaggression, which is this whole piece that Jeff Colgan has done out of Brown in Cambridge. But the point is that the oil industry can cause these exacerbated conflicts in multiple ways. And one way is petroaggression, which is defined as countries where petroleum accounts for more than 10% of their GDP, their gross domestic product, are 250% more likely to instigate military conflicts with other countries. So there's resource scarcity already. Climate change is exacerbating what we have for environmental resources. and continuing to rely off of the extraction of fossil fuels is causing further war and international conflict. And this reliance on militarization to uphold the operations of the fossil fuel industry around the globe and all over the world are those pieces where people are trying to protect their own lands from extractive industries, and those folks are usually met with state and paramilitary violence. Feel free to write in the chat how you're seeing or have seen oil greed affecting U.S. war involvement. There's many pieces to this part of the subject.
Moving on to a little bit about the Willow project here. So the US's journey to secure oil is not only waged in other countries, but right here in the States. This project has been in the news a lot lately, so you've probably heard of it. This project would generate enough oil to release 9.2 million metric tons of carbon pollution a year. That's equivalent to adding 2 million gas-powered cars to the road. And Willow is the single largest oil extraction project proposed on federal lands. And Alaskan Natives living close to this project are very rightfully concerned about the health and environmental impacts of this project. There are also huge concerns about habitat destruction for native species, about altering migration patterns, and so much more. And this is a complete betrayal of Biden's promise to bring us away from fossil fuels and end oil and gas drilling on public lands. So we just wanted to bring a little bit of attention to that ongoing struggle that's happening right now. And a little bit into pollution. Wow, there's so much to say about military pollution. Through the US military's daily activity causes emissions and pollution, as Lisa was talking about, the moving around of people and equipment, all of it causes a lot of pollution. Being at war, preparing for war causes massive amounts of air, land, and water pollution. And so some major examples of this are in the 1940s and 50s. The US military tested over 60 nuclear weapons on Marshall Islands, spewing radioactive material. In Washington State, there was radioactive toxic gases and fluids that were affecting fish that provide food and economic stability to the residents. And uranium mining and above ground nuclear weapons testing has been occurring for over 50 years and in and around the Navajo reservation. And many, like an astronomical amount of abandoned military sites are Superfund sites in the US. Domestic and foreign US military bases are super polluted. And this is due to toxic chemicals for jet fuel and other things that are used for war, cause contaminated drinking water in aquifers and soil and surrounding bases. And my photos for this aren't showing up for some reason. Oh, no, they are. A recent example of military pollution, and one that was highly reported on, but you don't hear about it as much in the news cycle lately, is the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility leaks. And this facility can hold up to 250 million gallons of fuel, and it had 2 major leaks in 2021 alone, and it sits above an aquifer that supplies a quarter of the water consumed in urban Honolulu. Who decided that was a good idea? I am not sure. This site's also about a mile away from the Honolulu Board of Water Supply shaft, which provides 20% of the drinking water for the region. So a lot of people depend on this drinking water, and then they saw major leaks. And they figured this out because of the smell in the water. And people started experiencing cramps and vomiting. And initially, the Navy dismissed these concerns, and the base commander said that the water was safe to drink. And then a year ago, the DoD had made a commitment to shut down the facility, but there really hasn't been any progress to do so. And it was built in 1943, and it has leaked over 200,000 gallons of fuel since it was built. Also, with that site, it contains fuel, which is combustible. So it also has to contain that film-forming foam as a fire depressant, which of course contains PFAS. And so in 2022, about 1,300 gallons of PFAS spilled inside the tunnel at Red Hill. So American occupation of Hawaii has resulted in a water crisis there, which is increasingly made worse by the effects of climate change. And the Native folks in Hawaii have asked people not to come to Hawaii anymore, and not to choose somewhere else to take your vacations, because this crisis has only gotten worse. Moving on to another point here. So climate change, fueled by capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, is making many parts of the world inhospitable. Many people have to move away from where they're from because of sea level rise, because of drought, fires, severe storms. So many reasons that people aren't able to stay in their homes, to work in their communities. And this migration is happening at many different levels between states, regions, different countries. I know for me personally, I've spoken to a lot of people that have been leaving California because of the fires and are coming to New Hampshire. And it's estimated that 200 million people will be displaced by the middle of the century due to climate change. And the US continues to ramp up border security, so it threats all people's freedom to move and stay where they need to. And climate change will affect every country in the world, but in a range of different ways at different times. It doesn't affect everyone equally. Indigenous people, people of color, people with low incomes, people in the global South did the least to cause this crisis, but will feel its impacts first and the most. And immigrant justice is climate justice, and challenging militarism is critical to achieving both. But really, instead of accepting its role in creating instability and violence in other countries, including the violence that comes with climate change, the US militarizes its borders, is racist and discriminates against migrants. And when people rise up in protest to these atrocities, it really reacts with a militarized police force and anti-protest legislation. So we think that another important piece to bring up in this conversation is the Pentagon's program to distribute surplus weapons, aircrafts, vehicles to police departments nationwide. So many of our military weapons are now going to police forces, being used against people standing up for climate justice and racial justice, like the Line 3 protests in Minnesota, like those in Ferguson in the wake of the 2014 killing of Michael Brown, like the Stop Cop City protests in Atlanta, where a protester was killed by police in January. This equipment should not be in the hands of police, and this is a very big issue.
And to kind of shift over more to like where we are, just like a head check of where we are with the climate crisis and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they have their last installment of 6 total assessments over 8 years of looking at things with 600 scientists involved. This last installment was 8,000 pages. I did not read all of it, but I do have some takeaways from it. So it's reported to include some of these pieces that are here up on the screen, and other pieces as well But overall, the global warming that has occurred at 1.1 degrees Celsius has spurred changes to our climate that are unprecedented in recent human history. And the impacts on people and ecosystems are more widespread and severe than what was expected, and will escalate rapidly with every fraction of a Celsius degree of warming. Our adaptation measures can effectively build resilience, but we need a lot more money behind it to scale to the solutions. And some climate impacts are already so severe that they cannot be adapted to, leading to losses and damages. Also, there's more than a 50% chance that global temperatures will rise or surpass 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that is between 2021 and 2040 across many studied scenarios. So again, this was an 8-year report, so it kind of went back in time as they were looking into it. And we also need urgent system-wide transformation so we can secure a net zero climate resilient future. And our carbon removal is now essential. This was a new thing for me to understand, is that it's essential. It's not just a conversation topic. We need it to limit global temperature rise. And so we need to be investing in carbon removal. And our climate change and our collective efforts to adapt and mitigate it are going to exacerbate inequity should we fail to ensure a just transition. And overall, the world must rapidly shift away from burning fossil fuels. It's the #1 cause of climate crisis. And the climate finance for both mitigation and adaptation needs to increase dramatically in this active decade that they were already starting to do research in. So by 2030.
So here's just a graphic that just shows you just the astronomical amount of money that has been spent on war and where that could have been invested to really take the climate crisis head on. And through some of the information Lisa was sharing about the IPCC report, organizations and people have been sounding the alarm on the climate crisis for decades, but you can really see where the prioritization has been. And we need to curb our emissions, the military needs to curb its emissions, but the action is not where it really needs to be. And you kind of have to ask the question is, yeah, where are our priorities? Are they in the right place? I think we all know the answer to that right now. And President Biden's 2024 federal budget would allocate $886 billion to Pentagon spending. The U.S. is committed to addressing climate change and achieving net zero greenhouse gases by 2050. And we can't achieve that with such a high investment being made by the Pentagon, one of the largest emitters in the world.
And the hope here is to bring a little bit of hope. So I think one of the bigger pieces around addressing toxic engagement that veterans have had to have while serving is around the PACT Act, the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxins. And while it was first voted against, it did eventually become signed by President Biden into law, and it expands health benefits for veterans who are exposed to burn pits and toxic substances during their service. And this was done through a lot of the people who were experiencing this, who were being told that their sickness was not because of their job, and also needing to continue to find how to survive the world while advocating for themselves and their fellow service people. And also, I think it got a bigger media attention because of Jon Stewart as being a public figure. And yeah, so that was signed in August of last year, and people have been starting to receive compensation and support from that through starting in September of last year.
Cool. So a little bit about who we are for those of y'all that don't know. We're a multi-generational movement of activists. We do grassroots organizing at the local, state, and federal level to transition to a renewable energy economy and to end our society's dependence on fossil fuels. We're building a movement for climate justice and working for systemic change locally and nationally. Here's a little bit about some of the campaigns that we're running right now. Some of our main focuses right now is our No Coal, No Gas campaign to try to shut down the last coal plant in New England in Bow, New Hampshire. We just launched a campaign geared towards the super high utility costs in New Hampshire. We do direct action, legislative advocacy, electoral work, and we focus a lot on community building. And these huge system changes that we're talking about require massive people power to revision how to change our structures, to prioritize people and planet first. So that takes a lot of us being very active, very consistent, learning, paying close attention to what's going on. So here are things that we kind of came up with just to do today. So if anyone feels like really excited to work on this issue, that intersection between climate and militarism, we encourage folks to start a team. We would happily support anyone that wants to work on this issue in trying to do it at the legislative level, in doing direct action around it, kind of wherever people are feeling moved to act on this issue, we will support you in doing that. Jean Shaheen is a senior member of the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee, the two primary committees over our military foreign policy. She and our other congressional delegates have a role in curbing the emissions of the Pentagon. So I think it's really important to pay close attention to what our congressional delegation is doing. And I don't have the chat up, but it looks like some other calls to action around our congressional delegates are going in there. And then I really want you to encourage to donate to either us or New Hampshire Peace Action or both. And as Will was saying, 350 New Hampshire was a project of New Hampshire Peace Action up until last year, and New Hampshire Peace Action is doing absolutely amazing work. So please donate to them. And our big thing that we're gearing up for right now is trying to get a bunch of comments sent to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission opposing ISO New England's continued funding of fossil fuels. I think our goal is 250 comments, which is, if you've done the process, it is a big goal. So we have a toolkit, which I think is going in the chat, that will help guide you through how to make one of those comments. We also have a couple of comment writing parties coming up that we can also drop in the chat to help guide you through making one of those comments.
So that is most of what we have for right now. We would love to hear if people just want to come off mute, and if someone's already talking, use star in the chat. Like, what are your initial reactions when you're hearing the ways that climate crisis and militarization intersect?
I'll open up just by saying that I think you guys did a really, I've been in and facilitated and heard a lot of conversations on this topic, how climate and militarism intersect, and I think you guys did. It was definitely one of my favorite presentations on. I think you covered so much so well. So just wanted to say I deeply appreciate how much time you guys spent and how thoughtful you were about making these connections. There are a bunch of questions in the chat. We've got a couple from Matt. I'm curious if you know about the first one. Came in while you were still in the middle of the presentation. It's what's the consensus on Saudi Arabia's new 170-kilometer city called the Line, claiming no cars, roads, or emissions? Have you heard of that? And do you have any thoughts on it? It's kind of a little off topic, but I wanted to make sure we
Very interactive website. I had not heard of this. I will definitely look into it tonight, though. I'm curious how they would transport like goods. Like, is that all public transportation? Like, is that a train all the time and people just walking from the train to deliver? I would have to think more about it and explore the website. So thank you, Matthew.
There's a question from Arnie. Is 350 having a news conference tomorrow, and what's it about?
Yes, we are having a press conference tomorrow. I believe it's at 11. Correct me if I'm wrong, Emma. That is about the high utility rates and that we are demanding that there will not be any utility shutoffs. So there's a winter period where people cannot have their utility shut off no matter how much money they may owe to the companies. And there's a little bit of math of how much you owe to each type of utility. But that period of not having your utility shut off ended. I think it was April 3rd would have been the first day that people would have had shutoffs. And so we are demanding that both there not be shutoffs and also people may not know this, but there was state aid that was starting to be provided in September, and up until from September to the end of March, only 1.5% of that aid had been given out to people who were requesting aid to be able to pay their utility bills. So we're really upset about that, and we need more people to be paying attention to that. And hundreds of people are still waiting for their aid requests to be processed. The cost of living is continuing to go high. I've been seeing these headlines where New Hampshire is in like the top 10 states for how expensive it is just to live here, rent or buy, and to add utilities on top of that just makes it unimaginable for people to live here. And we want to be able to have the space that people want to live in New Hampshire. That answers your question, Arnie. And I hope that you go tomorrow as well.
Yeah, and to add on to that, when we're in community, when we're out at events, and all of the so many questions, comments we're getting on our social media are about these high utility prices. And yeah, people are really struggling to pay these and are really passionate about this issue and creating more accountability for this issue.
Will, do you want me to pull some of these questions?
Sure.
There was a question from Susie about Senator Shaheen, and has she been made aware of all this waste? Anyone want to speak to, working with Senator Shaheen, having any luck, and knowing if she's got to know a lot of it given the committee she's on, but does any of you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would invite anyone to speak on this. I know that we have folks that have been probably speaking a lot to our congressional delegation about these issues. I have not spoken to Shaheen's office directly about pollution and emissions.
Well, it seems to me that she would be the number one target for talking to. I mean, I have nothing good to say about her, but I mean, she's in charge of all of this stuff, and she always, her fallback is always she works with people within the state, and she's a United States senator, and she should be at the forefront of these issues instead of falling back to, I take care of the people in New Hampshire. That's a congressperson's job. She's just, oh, well, I'm not going to go into it, but I can't stand the way she represents me because of these kinds of issues.
Thanks. Well, I would certainly suggest everyone here call her and ask her if she is aware of all this waste and these connections. That would be, and ask to get an answer back, and we'll see what happens.
And also, one of my other questions, I don't want to take up any more time, but is anybody, do we invite our congressional delegations, or at least someone on their staff, to these meetings?
It's interesting you bring it up. I mean, just last week we did our tax day visits to the offices, and it actually came up there. In particular, Chris Pappas's staff showed interest and asked to be invited. Asked to start coming to these sessions, which I thought was really great. It was a really positive thing that her district staff were interested in being and they weren't asking to be speakers. They were just asking to come participate in the conversations. So I'm hoping that might be a toe in the door, that we might actually start getting at least some congressional staff engaged in these conversations.
Good.
Looks like David had a question too.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Thank you, Emma and Lisa. Really interesting presentations. They were very long on facts, and I wanted to ask more about feelings. So how do you feel about the climate crisis, and maybe how would you like to feel about it, and how would you like other people to feel about it?
I feel like something that maybe is a little older in the conversation of people who are either paid organizers or really dedicating a lot of their free time to climate organizing. The individual pieces of the world is collapsing around me and I can't do anything about it except for recycle. That is kind of like the really old stuff. And the new pieces that I think people are feeling now is like really a deep understanding of collective action, that people can see that if we take this time together, we can make this change. Like if we all together were to have an event that is targeting Jane Shaheen, that's both an office visit, but also calling the lines and faxing the lines, that like we can make an impact and have her office listen to our demands, whether that be around militarism and climate, or around just climate, or around young people being able to have a future that's livable. And then there's another piece of, speaking of young people, where there is a generational piece that I'm seeing, where maybe people who are like above the boomer generation are saying like, oh, we're really relying on young people to do the best to save the rest of us. When you're still a consumer, you're still somebody that's able to advocate, and there's just some gaps in people depending on what their identity is and what their community looks like. So personally, like I really appreciate my community. We are 20, 30 somethings in the Seacoast. We talk to each other about issues. We do mutual aid support of each other. And we make sure that people understand that like, if you have an issue, you can voice it and you can be able to have that action be taken. So I'm really excited to actually engage with that community that I have around making the FERC comments, because we've already seen some progress in that campaign, as you know very well, David.
So Gary had his hand up for a second. Did you change your mind, Gary?
No, I didn't. I'm an interloper here. I'm from San Diego, but welcome. I really appreciate what you guys have put together here. It's refreshing to see this convergence of militarism and climate crisis being discussed by a 350.org group. I'm also a member of 350 in San Diego, as well as Veterans for Peace, and I'm part of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. And we present kind of maybe a similar but a different view, because we're primarily veterans, but looking at these two existential threats. And one of the key points I like to make when we're addressing climate activists is that the government, the US government and the military has had a concerted effort so that we don't get transparency of military emissions. It goes back to 1997 in Kyoto, where the US lobbied extensively to exempt many military emissions from being reported. And even though the US did not sign on to that agreement, that has been the policy. And even in Paris, there was no improvement. Military missions are still voluntary. So the numbers that you cited and we cited, we use a lot of the same slides with Brown University and Professor Nada Crawford in looking at estimates of fuel usage and other stuff. But the military pollution is truly an elephant in the room, and we need to talk about it. And last year, we were successful in getting Representative Barbara Lee to introduce a House resolution to demand transparency of military emissions. It didn't go anywhere, and we're in a new Congress now. But I applaud your efforts. We have a national website. I put it in the chat, and I think we should collaborate. We're all in this together, and we need to spread the word on the military, which is like, the third rail, especially in San Diego. We're like in the belly of the beast. But more and more climate people are seeing that, it's up to us to demand transparency and accountability. So thank you for your presentation.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have any more time for Q&A tonight. But I do want to just one last time say thank you so much to Lisa and Emma for just a really fantastic presentation. And thank you to the audience for great questions. These presentations will continue to be free and open to the public. So make sure you stay tuned. Our next few are going to be on May 1st, as part of our Spirituality of Peacemaking series. We're going to be hosting Edith Rizal, who wrote The Way of Abundance. She's going to be talking about white Christian nationalism and the ways we are divided. On May 8th, we'll be hosting Moji Aga from the Iranian Nonviolence Project, who's going to talk about his work in tying Iranian and American peace activists together to build bonds to help prevent war. May 15th, we'll host Noura Zakarna, a young Palestinian American woman who's here, a young Palestinian woman who's here in New Hampshire working on her law degree, and is going to talk about growing up in Palestine. And then we've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. We've got a New Hampshire Peace Action Acts. We'll be talking about the repeal of the Iraq authorization for the use of military force on May 16. So if you are here tonight, it means you're on our email list. So watch for those Friday email blasts with all of our upcoming events. Check out 350.org and go make a donation to them if you are able. And everybody have a good night.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone.